From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Thursday in mid-January to preview the Ravens divisional round matchup against the Buffalo Bills. We're going to place the Ravens into pressure tiers, talk about who could be under the most pressure to win this weekend. And of course, we will preview a team that the Ravens beat back in week 4 and look at what has changed since that last matchup. But first, the Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has been building a legacy of excellence for years, from developing hybrid technology to upping the standards of safety and efficiency. Toyota is always innovating, always making progress. And with a superior lineup of in-stock SUVs, including the adventure-ready RAV4 and capable, affordable Corolla Cross, you can experience the legacy of Toyota for yourself. Visit buyatoyota.com, the official website for deals, to find out more.
Don't
Toyota,
miss the 2025 CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament in Baltimore, February 25th to March 1st at CFG Bank Arena. Watch HBCU teams battle to be crowned champion. Check out the free fan fest and performances at the Baltimore Convention Center. Enjoy downtown's top restaurants and stay in one of our amazing hotels. The CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament. You want to be here.
All right, Jonas, we got some interesting news to discuss first and foremost before we get into all that, and that is the return of one Diontae Johnson. What do you think he's going to go for on Sunday? You thinking 5 catches, $150, 2 touchdowns?
I couldn't pick him up on my fantasy playoff team. Just went too quickly off the waiver wire.
Yeah, he's gone. Didn't go too quickly off the waiver wire for Eric DeCosta, though, who claimed the former Ravens wide receiver, who they traded a draft pick 4 months ago, and just had the most disastrous stretch of months that I've seen from any player, going from the Ravens to the Texans and now back to the Ravens. But Jonas, I think some people saw this immediately and said, why? And then some other people thought, maybe, is Zay Flowers really that hurt? And then some people thought, is he doing it for the comp pick? Why? Why is Diontae Johnson back in Baltimore? If he ever is going to even appear in Baltimore, do you think he's even coming back to the city of Baltimore?
I wouldn't. Not in this winter. He's not. He can't play because of that's how the NFL's waiver wire process works. Although I guess from my understanding, if he'd gone unclaimed through waivers, then there was a possibility that he could have been picked up and could have been signed to a team. But if the Ravens have any hopes of having this signing materialize into a comp pick, and it doesn't take a whole lot of money for someone being signed away during the offseason to materialize into a draft pick, then maybe this is the play. But it's also just, Eric DeCosta's favorite movie is The Godfather. What is a more kind of Machiavellian thing than claiming someone knowing that you are not going to be able to play him, all in the interest of potentially keeping him out of the hands of another team that might need him this weekend. And you could say that there was no more receiver needy team in the NFL playoffs than the Houston Texans, and they still managed to part ways with him. So what kind of market would there have been really? But considering everything that happened, considering, some of the, somewhat veiled remarks that Diontae Johnson made about the Ravens after he got to Houston and how, that was a better opportunity for him, it was probably a little tinge of self-satisfaction with Eric DeCosta that this is the way his season effectively ends.
Yeah, our word of the day could have been petty, because that is all this is. It's pettiness. It's trying to block Diontae Johnson from playing in another playoff game. It's trying to block another team from allowing him to play in the playoffs for their team. And it's some last-ditch effort to try to get a comp pick. I still don't know if any team is going to hand him the kind of contract it will take to alter the comp pick formula and allow the Ravens to recoup an asset in the 2026 draft. Because if they sign him, if some team signs him this winter and gives him a sizable deal, then that would affect it. But given the disastrous few months he's had, what team would want to bank on that? And what team would want to pick him up on the waiver wire anyway? Like, he could have gone into the hands of the Chiefs. Would he really have mattered? Because the Texans, like you said, needed as much help as possible at wide receiver, and he couldn't find a role with them. He finished his Ravens career with 1 catch for 5 yards. And in Houston, between the regular season and the playoffs, I think he had 24 yards on 3 catches.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the over the cap comp pick breakdown, which is always really interesting. For even a 7th rounder, some of the annual average salary of these guys is like $4.5 million, $4 million, $3.5 million. I think there would probably be that kind of market for a guy who, if we are quick to forget, was leading the Carolina Panthers in catches, in receiving yards, in a lot of important stats when he left them. But there's definitely a bit of a poison pill attached to him, considering how everything has gone. And he's not so old that he wouldn't be completely unattractive on the market. And we know that some of these teams with young quarterbacks will definitely need the injection of a guy who could be a solid wide receiver too.
Would he even want to be? Would he even want to be a wide receiver too? I mean, is he okay with taking any role that's not wide receiver?
I would hope that this process has humbled him, but
it didn't humble him in Houston. I mean, a lot of the same issues cropped up. The one thing that I saw on social media, which I cannot agree with, is people saying, well, EDC is a genius for this. Look, Eric DeCosta is an excellent general manager. He's still the guy that traded a draft pick to get somebody who didn't end up doing anything beyond 1 catch for 5 yards for him.
And who had all the red flags that have now been waving flagrantly for the past 2 months in Carolina and in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. And you could say it's a worthwhile gamble to make, because it was still a day 3 pick. It's not a huge gamble. And that's fine. You missed on that. It's not a backbreaker. It doesn't kill you by any stretch. It would be nice to have him this week if you're without Zay Flowers again, who's not in the practice field. And it would be nice to have him contributing, but it's not the end of the world. But I'm not going to say he's a genius because he picked him back up just to allow him, just to block him from getting to another team.
It's the same unnecessary rush to judgment when people were comparing the Eddie Jackson contract to what Geno Stone would have cost.
Right.
And, well, there's a reason that he cost a couple $1 million, and it's because it turns out he was a player on the downside of his career who wouldn't be any good in Baltimore.
Exactly. All right, let's turn the page to some players that will actually be playing in Sunday's game. Jonas, we've placed the Ravens players and coaches into tiers, into pressure tiers, and we've got different names for these categories, which you came up with, because there is a lot of pressure on both of these teams coming into this game. On the Bills side, it's a team that hasn't gotten over the hump, has yet to make the Super Bowl under Josh Allen. And on the Ravens side, it's the exact same story. A team that has made the AFC Championship game just once with Lamar Jackson is trying to get into the Super Bowl for the first time with their superstar quarterback. And I want to make it clear, the voting is done for MVP. So the result of this game will not sway any voters because they've already cast their vote. But certainly the narratives will be important for both of these quarterbacks, for both of these head coaches, and for a lot of players on both sidelines.
Yeah, and I think we're going to start off least pressurized to most pressurized, and for the least pressurized, we're calling it the freshman mixer pressure. It's you're a little bit you're a little bit uncertain of who's going to be there. You're a little bit unsure of what to say, what to do. But at the end of the day, you've got a long semester ahead of you. You're going to meet people. You're going to find joy, find relationships, and
you're usually just hanging with your boys in the corner.
Yeah,
not
like
making any
middle school sock hop all over again.
Yeah,
listening to some 41 or whatever's on the radio. And I think at the top of that very low pressure, very low stakes scenario is, for me, Derrick Henry. There's a lot of equity I think that he's earned with this Ravens fan base. He doesn't have this kind of fumbling habit that would be held against him. He doesn't have a bad playoff record. I think there's just great joy in what he's brought to this Ravens team, to Baltimore this year. And frankly, I think when we think about, why quarterbacks are paid the way that they are, why receivers are paid the way they are, and then we think about just the conversation about running backs in general, you don't really hear a lot of people talk about running backs being like the decisive factor in a running game, in a playoff game, in the same way that you would a quarterback.
Right.
Like they are, when they are as good as Derrick Henry or James Cook, they are obviously additive pieces, but no one is talking about like, oh, if the Bills take away Lamar Jackson's deep ball, then X.
Yeah.
For the Ravens, for the NFL at large, I think there's this understanding of so much of a running back success is tied to whether they're getting blocks or how many carries they're getting. And that is out of Derrick Henry's hands. Like he doesn't have the control over a game that Lamar Jackson does, because he is not touching the ball on every single play. So you can't really begrudge him if he only finishes this game with like 63 yards.
Yeah, I think of the Adrian Peterson MVP season because that was the last running back to win MVP, and Derrick Henry at some points this season was being discussed as an MVP candidate. And that Vikings team was, a lot of people credited them being in the playoffs. I think they had Christian Ponder at quarterback that year.
Yeah.
A lot of them credited Adrian Peterson with a large reason, that they even made the playoffs, but they lost in the first round. Nobody was blaming Adrian Peterson for losing that game.
Right.
If the Ravens lose on Sunday, a lot more of the blame is going to be on Lamar Jackson than it would be on Derrick Henry.
Also not being blamed for the Ravens' last loss in the playoffs, Kyle Hamilton. He allowed a touchdown, Travis Kelce, on that incredible end zone throw, but there were stretches of that game when he just took over. And same deal as Derrick Henry. He's done far more good than harm toward for this Ravens team. Obviously, if he's cooked in coverage, then that is going to probably add. That's definitely going to add to whatever baggage he brings in the playoffs last year. But for the most part, I think Ravens fans know that he is one of the best defenders in the NFL. He's maybe playing. If you are of the belief that he is best in the slot, you could say that he's playing out of position, even though that's not really entirely true. And I just think that what he brings to this defense and what he's given this team and this franchise, has endeared him in that same kind of bulletproof way.
Yeah, and I think you could throw Rashad Bateman into that category as well, because what a season he has had. 9 touchdowns in the regular season, caught a touchdown last week in the playoffs against the Steelers. A guy that was handed a contract extension a few months ago that was questioned by some, including me, and he has made good on it. He stayed healthy. He has been very productive, almost 800 receiving yards this season. He's proven to be a very good number 2 wide receiver. And I think at this point, fans are pretty happy with the season that he's had. And if the passing game struggles to get going without Zay Flowers, I think a lot of people would be understanding of that, because Zay Flowers is just a better wide receiver. He's closer to a number 1 than Rashad Bateman is. So I don't think that fans are going to necessarily blame Bateman for, not pulling his weight if the Ravens passing game isn't up to snuff without Zay.
Yeah, I think all you need to know about the Ravens fan base's relationship with Rashad Bateman is just how many sick TikTok edits there have been of him just scoring on people.
Better than the clips that you put together last year of him getting open without catching the ball.
That's true. Number 2 pressure tier is in homage to, one, the icy roads that have been a problem around the Baltimore, Washington area, but also to John Harbaugh and what he told his teammates, what he told his team after they'd made their way to the facility through snow and ice. We're calling it a fishtail on an empty, icy road, where you're feeling a little sketchy, but ultimately, as long as you do your job, you're not in too much trouble. You're not really putting anyone else at risk. So we're talking about just a step up from freshman Mixer. And I think at the top of that list, Zach Gore. He's obviously, we're a long way away from him being a guy that people wanted to run out of town. This defense has turned into one of the best in the NFL, although it hasn't faced anyone like Josh Allen in quite a long time. He's done a good job of connecting with players, of devising good stuff, of having this team in position to defend motion, defend long passes, screen passes, defend the run. Obviously, he is not the golden god that Mike McDonald was at the end of his tenure in Baltimore. But again, that was year 2 for Mike. This is year 1 for Zach Gore. And I think, considering everything that's happened with Eddie Jackson, with Marcus Williams, that this defense is as good as it is, and even Trenton Simpson, I think there's still a lot of love for Zach Gore.
Have you ever fishtailed on an icy road, Jonas?
Very scary. And
Isn't
I did it while listening to Drake's, I forget the name of the song, but the lyrics are "Just hold on, I'm going home," and that that compelled me to turn off the radio, because I was not. Yikes. It was way too on the nose.
Well, I'm glad you're here with us today, because it is scary. I mean, I went to Syracuse and I experienced that a few times, but I will say Syracuse is much better at salting their roads than the state of Maryland and Baltimore. I mean, my goodness, just throw some salt on the roads before it snows. Just that easy. All right, in this category as well, Jonas, Eric DeCosta, because he had some pretty big wins this past offseason. Obviously, Derrick Henry is at the top of that list, cutting loose some guys that, were going to be struggling with injuries and struggling with performance. I think you could say allowing a guy like Ronald Darby to walk, or, the Morgan Moses trade, a guy who was productive for the Jets, but, is now entering his free agency and struggled with injuries. But there were also some minor misses. I mean, he did not bring back Kevin Zeitler, who was great for the Lions. And he brought back Arthur Millette on a 2-year deal. That has not worked out. Millette has really not played at all this season. And now he's entering an offseason as soon as if the Ravens get eliminated. He's entering an offseason where he's going to have to hand out some big contract extensions if he wants to get deals done early with guys like Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum. Those guys are Pro Bowl level. They're all pro level.
Maybe even a second tier guy like Travis Jones too. If you want to buy the dip. I mean, he's going to play as many snaps. Eric DeCosta is going to play as many snaps as Diontae Johnson. So, not a huge amount of pressure, but still, obviously.
But will Diontae Johnson be on the sideline with a chain around his neck?
I don't think Diontae Johnson is going to willingly go to Orchard Park, New York, in the middle of January.
EDC might though.
Yeah,
he might be wearing that chain.
Next in our fishtailing on empty road is Roquan Smith. Another All-Pro season for All-Pro row. Living up to what was and I think still is, the NFL's biggest deal for an off-ball linebacker. And I think that the pressure for this isn't so much about his postseason narrative as it is just how much pressure Josh Allen and this Bills offense puts on guys. Josh Allen is impossible to tackle. He's going to be even more hard to tackle in this weather. This Buffalo offensive line, big, strong. They pushed around the Broncos, who have a really good front. That this past weekend they might throw a 6 offensive linemen. That they do that more often than any other offense in the NFL. James Cook, really good out of the backfield, very good as a runner, very good as a receiver. Ty Johnson, we saw what he can do when he's out there. And I think just before the snap as well, the Bills use a lot of motion before the snap. They're really good at it, and so that's going to put a lot of pressure on Rowe to make sure that everything is lined up. Everyone is handling their coverage responsibilities as they should. Everyone is not taking the cheese on some of the eye candy stuff. So this is probably his biggest challenge of the season. And you trust a guy as smart and as physically dominant as Roquan to be ready for it, but it's going to be a pressure cooker for him for sure.
And another defensive player we could throw in this category as well, Marlon Humphrey, because he's had a checkered playoff history, a couple bad games in 2019, 2020 against Tennessee, but he's also a guy that has gone up in fans' estimation a lot this year, because last year played 10 regular season games and was in and out of the lineup dealing with a lot of different injuries, fully healthy this year, and has really balled out. So to me, he came into the year with serious questions about when the Ravens might have to move on from him, given the huge contract that he signed. At this point, I think he's solidified himself as obviously a member of the 2025 team and maybe beyond because of how good he's been. But still, there's some pressure there.
Yeah, and he's going to be matched up against the Bills' best receiver, Khalil Shakir, especially when he's lined up in the slot. So that's going to be a big test for him. He won that first meeting in Week 4. I think, if I remember correctly, Khalil Shakir came into that game having caught every single target that Josh Allen had thrown him, and first or second target that he gets from Josh Allen in that game is an incompletion, and it's covered by Marlon Humphrey. So I think he should still have that advantage in this one. The last one in the fishtailing category is Daniel Failele. I think we had to have some offensive line representation, and we might as well go with the perceived weak link of this group. Buffalo wants to play aggressively with those defensive linemen. They obviously give up a lot of explosive plays, but they're also really good at making contact at or before the line of scrimmage. And that's, guys shooting gaps. And if you are shooting gaps and you want to have offensive linemen who are quick enough to react, and Daniel Failele, when he's been off his game, has looked sluggish. You think about just what he was in that Eagles game, where he was just completely outmatched physically, athletically by some of the really, really important players along that Eagles front. And in this one, he's going to be seeing a lot of Ed Oliver, who, was given a big contract by Buffalo, has not had a great season. I think only 3 sacks so far for the Bills. But, the Daniel Failele that we saw against Pittsburgh was really, really impressive. He was tossing guys out the club. He was knocking them on their butt. He was just finally finding a way to kind of weaponize this incredibly dominant physical frame that he has. And I think that Pittsburgh defensive line is probably a step up from what awaits him in Buffalo. So if he can just continue to carry it on, continue to meet the bell in this very, very cold weather. I mean, we know that, playing in Minnesota, he probably has some experience of being in these cold weather games, but it's going to be a very, very tough situation, because it's one thing to play at home in Baltimore with a crowd that knows, to be, to help this offense. But if you're playing on the road at Highmark Stadium where the
Yeah.
crowd is going to be lubricated with a lot of alcohol, yelling their heart out, it can be tough to be on your P's and Q's with the snap count and everything.
Our next pressure category, Jonas, is LSAT pressure. Do you know what SAT stands for? Because obviously LSAT, I mean, it stands for law, SAT.
Standardized aptitude test.
Apparently, SAT stands for Scholastic Aptitude Test.
Okay,
But
that was
apparently
close.
now it no longer stands for anything because they don't just use Scholastic Aptitude Test in anything. How'd you do on your SATs? I haven't taken the LSAT, of course.
Yeah, I did okay. I did okay.
You did okay?
Yeah.
You're going to reveal your SAT score on this?
No, I'm good.
I'm sure you did very well, Jonas.
We're calling this the LSAT because this is a graduate level course for a lot of guys, and it's going to determine, what comes next.
What kind of law school they'll get
in their
into.
career. Yeah, and our top law school candidate is Brandon Stevens. It's been a rough season for him. This is probably the best comparison for the aspiring lawyer category because he is going to be a free agent in a couple months' time when the new league year starts, and
He needs some good internships, let me tell you.
he
Good
he
letters of
definitely-
recommendation.
Yeah, he definitely probably should have taken some classes pass fail. I mean, you have the stats here. It just has not been a good situation, and I think for me the most interesting part about this game, and frankly, retrospect, what that Steelers game was it was him, not Nate Wiggins, who was playing every snap in that game. Even when Pittsburgh lined up in personnel that required just 2 cornerbacks on the field, they took Wiggins off. They kept Stevens on. I think some of that was wanting to have a guy who's a little bit more responsible as a run defender, and I think that's also going to be a consideration against Buffalo because of just how much of a dog Matt Collins is as a run blocker. But man, I mean, if I'm calling the shots, I would much rather have Marlon Humphrey on one side, Nate Wiggins on the other.
Yeah.
If it's just 2 wide receivers that I have to worry about.
And we talked after the Steelers game about how Brandon Stevens still does have the ability to crank up some good games, but it's just way more bad games than good. I'm just a little sick of hearing about how the advanced stats still tell me he's having an okay season because at this point, he's 99th on PFF's ranking of the 117 cornerbacks in the NFL. Nobody gave up more yards in the passing game than Brandon Stevens did this year, over 900. And I know that that's not a perfect category because he's getting targeted a lot. I get that. But my eyes tell me, and the stats tell me, he has been sub-average this year. And it's just frustrating that we are at this point in the season, the Ravens haven't found a better solution and they keep running him out there. I mean, Tre'Davious White looked like a temporary solution midway through the season, but that hasn't really worked out. He got burnt against the Steelers. So a lot of pressure on him. Some good amount of pressure on Todd Monken as well, Jonas, because Todd Monken's been interviewing. There was a report from Adam Schefter this morning that he is interviewing with the Jaguars today and the Bears tomorrow. He was also linked to the Las Vegas Raiders. 6 teams still have openings, and he's trying to get a head coaching job, as he should be. And he's in the middle of these interviews while he's also preparing to attack this Buffalo Bills defense on the road. That's a lot to be dealing with this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably like an 18, 20-hour day for a guy like
this
that.
This process is so they got to do something. I don't know how you do it, but the fact that these coaches have to prepare for the biggest interviews of their lives while also preparing for the biggest games of their lives is a flawed system.
Yeah, it's just something that you have to deal with. I think what fans should know is that teams are accommodating with the timing of these requests, which is why you see like a Schefter or Rappaport tweet out that someone's completed an interview request at like 10:30 at night. It's because after these guys finish their day jobs, quote unquote, that's when they move on to these virtual interviews, and that's when they get the bulk of their time in with their FaceTime with these front office officials. So for Todd, I think obviously he's not getting any younger. He turns 59 in February. You see just the kind of modern model for what an NFL head coach is. It's a guy who's in his 40s. It's a guy who's whiz kid offensive line like a Ben Johnson. But I think for Todd, he is obviously bringing into this game, the expectation that the Ravens will run wild against Buffalo because of what they did in week 4. And I think there were similar expectations, certainly when the Ravens faced the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game last year, because Kansas City had not defended the run particularly well. And then they had just 8 running back runs total in that game. He completely gave up on it in the second half. I think there was certain parts of that decision were defensible, but if it gets into a situation where the Bills take an early lead, they're stopping Derrick Henry. You wonder if are you going to be able to play catch up with this Bills offense if you take on if you take on these time consuming drives. What do you do? And I think he's kind of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation if this defense doesn't hold up his end of the bargain and Derrick Henry is not having the kind of running lanes that he did in week 4. So it's a weird situation for him. I think he's a better coordinator now than he was last year. I mean, the best offense in football. It would be tough to hold, this game against him, even if they do lose. But all that being said, I think there's still a lot of pressure because of the scar tissue of that AFC Championship game.
Definitely. Another guy who actually had to overcome some real scar tissue to play in last year's AFC Championship game is Mark Andrews, because that was his first game back from injury after he suffered that injury in November last year on the hip drop tackle. Came back and just wasn't himself, just, sped up his timeline to get back onto the field and didn't play a whole lot. I think, fans still kind of maybe hold a grudge against him. Perhaps some portion of the fan base for dropping a pass in 2019, the playoffs against Tennessee. And in 7 career playoff games, 24 catches on 46 targets for 354 yards. So 254 yards. So 36 yards per game, which is not spectacular.
Not a single touchdown either.
Yeah. He's come up big this season. Even though he started the season slow. So there's a lot of pressure on Mark Andrews to step up and be a solid target for Lamar.
Yeah. And this Bills defense does a good job versus tight ends. I mean, Matt Milano is great in coverage. Terrell Bernard, I think, is pretty good. The safeties are not especially great. You saw, Troy Franklin run by them on that deep shot touchdown to Bo Nix. Obviously, we're not expecting Mark Andrews to be running any go routes, but I think if they are expecting those guys, Taylor Rapp, DeMar Hamlin, to win man-to-man against Mark Andrews because there's not a lot of fear for these wide receivers, then I think that's where Mark should be able to dominate. But yeah, I mean, I think you look at just that playoff record, the no touchdowns, the bagel there is pretty notable considering just how often he scored over his career. I mean, he's the Ravens' all-time leader in touchdown catches, right? So he needs to have a nice game, or Isaiah Likely just, this can't be a game where Lamar's, held to 180 yards passing on a day where Derrick Henry's bottled up and he can't find his most trusted target.
Yeah, and think back to the last time the Bills and Ravens met in the playoffs where Tyler Huntley throws a difficult pass to catch in the back of the end zone, and it just bounces out of Mark Andrews' hands. Probably a ball that would have been incredibly hard to come down with, but another play that I think that was on 4th down too, that the Ravens could have converted, would have made it a 1-score game, but ball just slipped out of his hands, and there's another opportunity that slipped out of his hands. All right, next category. We have 2 more categories left. So the pressure, Jonas, is increasing exponentially here. This one is hostage negotiator pressure. This is the kind of one where you're on the phone and you got to get those hostages out. That's the kind of pressure that you're under because John Harbaugh is in that category, I think you could say, Jonas.
Should we do this entire category in our best Liam Neeson voices?
Yeah, if you can do the full monologue, then, I know who you are. I know where you live. And what's the, I don't know the end of part of it. I haven't seen Taken in a long time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in a long time. I've seen both Taken and Taken 2, but I don't know how many they have.
But have you seen Nosferatu 1?
I haven't seen Nosferatu 1. I have seen Nosferatu 2.
Yeah, John Harbaugh, number 1.
I'm going to see The Brutalist tonight, Jonas.
Right, you've already bragged about that off my.
There's an intermission.
Yeah, they have those in football games too.
Am I going to get free food in the middle of the intermission like I do with the Ravens games?
John Harbaugh is, as our colleague Kyle Goon wrote, up for a contract renewal. He's not yet entering. He's not at the end of his contract, but Steve Bisciotti, the Ravens owner, does not typically like to have his coaches be lame duck coaches. So this would be the offseason to extend John Harbaugh. I think the fact that the Ravens avoided a calamitous loss to the Steelers means that it was highly, highly, highly unlikely that anyone but John Harbaugh would return as would be Ravens coach next year. But, if stuff really goes wild and just completely upside down on Sunday, maybe there's a possibility that Steve Bisciotti changes his mind. I just think that that's not really how he does his business. I think, we're going to talk about this when we get to the last category, but there is probably more pressure locally on John Harbaugh than there is nationally, because there is this great respect for what he is, what he's done, the kind of culture that he's built. But a lot of Ravens fans, I think, feel that they've been burned by John Harbaugh, by him not kind of taking the wheel himself in that AFC Championship game and insisting on the Ravens running more, not having the Ravens better prepared for the Titans when they lost. Some of these are credible arguments, some of them aren't, but I do think that he should feel, he would be feeling a lot of pressure and probably could lash out if, this is a game that goes poorly and there are some tough questions asked of him in the post-game press conference.
I am glad that you brought up the delta in perception from national viewership standpoint and local viewership standpoint, because if you ask people outside of Baltimore to rank the top 5 head coaches, a lot of people would put John Harbaugh in that category. And I know fans know that, and they think that he is overrated nationally, but that's just the kind of category he is in a lot of people's minds around the game. And you can guarantee, unless it's a crazy blowout and the Ravens just get embarrassed on Sunday, you can guarantee that, if they lose on Sunday, all of the conversations on Monday will be about on every First Take and FS1 and every sports talk show will be about Lamar Jackson's playoff record, not about John Harbaugh's playoff record. So that's why Lamar Jackson, to spoil our last category, is in the highest pressure tier. John Harbaugh is not in that category. And I think a lot of people should be giving him credit for the kind of turnaround that the Ravens had defensively. I mean, he stuck with Zach Orr, and Zach Orr deserves the bulk of the credit. And the players deserve a lot of credit, but he managed that situation pretty well. The fact that they weathered the storm of overturning 3 members of the offensive line. I mean, this is a team that won 12 regular season games and finished the regular season with a flourish, took the division from the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team they were trailing the whole way. So there's certainly a lot of appreciation for what John Harbaugh does year in and year out, and especially this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's cursed by some of his coaching attributes, in that they're not as apparent as they would be for an Andy Reid who's calling up plays, nor are they as apparent as someone like Sean
McVay.
Sure, yeah, Dan Campbell in Detroit, because he is, with his chest out, saying all these, incredibly rousing locker room speeches. Mm-hmm. John Harbaugh does get up and make, very impassioned locker room speeches, but Dan Campbell is a beast unto himself. He's going for it as aggressively as anyone in the NFL. John Harbaugh is also aggressive relative to the rest of the NFL, but I think he's kind of fallen back more closely to the rest of the pack. And what he's done, or what he does do, is make good coaching hires that kind of get overlooked and not really ascribed to him for the hire in the first place. The Ravens last year led the league in sacks. This year they're second. I don't think anyone would say that this is like a top 2 pass rushing unit, but they hired Chuck Smith and they put themselves in a position where they can rack up a lot of sacks, rack up a lot of pressures. They, lost Joe D tragically this summer. They found a replacement just, completely unexpectedly in George Warhop, who has turned this unit into a, upper 25th percentile group in the NFL. And there were concerns entering this league that they would be bottom 25th percentile. So he is, I think, happy to, not have a lot of attention for that kind of thing. I think he is, he's a proud, prideful man. And I think, he would be happy to talk your ear off about why he made certain hires or why he made certain moves. But he wants another Super Bowl. The Ravens want another Super Bowl. And I think because of what this offense has done, what this defense has done, maybe being a step ahead after all that they lost this offseason, not just personnel wise, but coaching wise, lost, Joe Ortiz to the Chargers, that they are back here. And if not for the Chiefs having home field advantage, would be the AFC Super Bowl favorite. I think it's hard to imagine, one, him not coming back, but 2, him not also feeling the wrath of Ravens fans if they lose in the divisional round.
One piece of advice, if I could offer it to John Harbaugh, is to wear his glasses more. I've seen it a lot in Hard Knocks. I think it's a good look. Kind of softens him, and I understand why he probably prefers contacts, but
professorial.
It is very professorial, and it's good when he's standing in front of the room and in front of a lot of Ravens players. And I'm just saying, he looks better with the glasses, Jonas.
Justin Tucker. right up there, I think, with John Harbaugh. You initially, Paul, did not have him on this list, which I think was a glaring omission.
It certainly was.
Worst regular season of his career so far, 22 for 30 on field goals. He hasn't missed a kick in the playoffs in a while, but he did miss 2 kicks in Buffalo in 2020. That was a crazy windy game. Lake effects being what it is in Erie County there. Don't want to hold it against him too much, but you think about some of the high leverage spots where he has come up short. Think of that first Pittsburgh game, which everyone has pointed to as just kind of the model for how to beat this Ravens team. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure for him, whether it's extra points, whether it's 30-yard field goals, 50-yard field goals, end of quarter field goals, end of half field goals. And you just add all that to the fact that this is going to be a very, very cold game, and kicking in the cold has got to suck. I mean, that ball has just got to feel like a rock when it's coming off the laces. He has done okay in freezing in temperatures over his career. He's 14 for 19, which isn't that great, but 3 of those kicks were missed blocks. So say give him a little bit more protection, maybe he would have been closer to league average. But yeah, I mean, you just wonder what is going on in his head psychologically. Hasn't been asked to make a whole lot of difficult kicks since he came back from that bye. He made the 150-yarder. I think he's obviously pretty much booted every single extra point right through the middle of the goalpost. But being on the road, being prime time, I think it's fair to expect like 50 million people watching this game, because that's how many people watched the Bills Chiefs game last year. He over his career has been defined by his imperviousness to pressure, but we've obviously seen a little bit more susceptible Justin Tucker this season.
Yeah, and our final category, Jonas, is the kind of pressure that can make diamonds. Did you actually look up how much pressure that is?
Well, I was looking to see what, like, when I was considering the tiers for this segment, I was like, what are the different levels of pressure? And I got nowhere.
Really?
Yeah.
Call a scientist. What
at 11 o'clock at night?
Yeah. We got to get a story about this.
Diamonds require 725,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. I do not know what that means, but it sounds very impressive.
As if you had a square inch and you put 725,000 pounds on it.
I guess so.
That's the kind of pressure. I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Lamar Jackson alone. We mentioned that this is there's a divergence locally and nationally in terms of how this game will be held against Lamar. Obviously, if he just completely messes the bed, then I think both parts of this Ravens fan base will hold it against him. But there will still be some people who make excuses for him because Todd Monken didn't do this, or the offensive line didn't do that, or the Bills did this, yada, yada. I understand that there will always be Lamar Jackson stands, but I think even they would have to acknowledge that this is the biggest game of his career, in the same way that the AFC Championship game would be the biggest game of his career, in the same way that the Super Bowl would be the biggest game of his career. This is, the most critical stretch. This is a potentially legacy-altering stretch in his career, and he doesn't need to win to, avoid some of the criticism that would be hurled his way. But I do think that he can't put up a stinker like he did in that Chiefs game, where he's basically ending that game with an interception into triple coverage because he's feeling a little bit too confident in his ability to drop that ball to Isaiah Likely.
Yeah, he is at a point where he's a victim of his own success in some ways, because if he had taken a slight step back during the regular season this year from his MVP form last year, I think you could ascribe that. A lot of people on the outside would ascribe that to, well, the offensive line is turning over. Maybe Zay Flowers isn't a true number one wide receiver. He's more of a gadget guy. Like, there are a lot of reasons that he could take a step back, but he didn't. He was an MVP caliber quarterback again. We'll see if he ends up winning it, but he was awesome this year. And so he generated a lot of talk and a lot of attention this season. And if he comes up short in the playoffs again, there will be a lot more criticism nationally. I mean, if he loses this game, he drops to 3-5 in his playoff career. And it's tough because you look at the quarterbacks that he's lost to, and it's Josh Allen and it's Patrick Mahomes. So it's Ryan Tannehill in Lamar's first playoff game, or second playoff game, I should say. But it's a tough road to hoe for Lamar Jackson because of the kind of legacy that he wants to achieve and the kind of category he has put himself in as a regular season quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, people remember the Rams' best show on turf offense because one of those offenses led to a Super Bowl.
Right.
The Ravens in 2019, when they had the NFL's best offense, they scored 12 points in that loss to the Titans. Last year, best offense in football, I think, or I don't think they had the best offense in football, but they were up there in DVOA, just 10 points in that loss to the Chiefs. This year, again, a generational offense. They averaged almost 7 yards per play. They scored so many touchdowns. They were so efficient running the ball, passing the ball. This Buffalo defense, as we're about to go into, is not. It's probably not even. It might not even be as good as the Steelers. It's not elite. There are definitely vulnerabilities in the run defense. The safeties aren't great. The linebackers are kind of erratic. So this defense is there for the taking. And even though the Ravens don't have Zay Flowers, they didn't have him against Pittsburgh, and they were still capable of rolling up 300 yards in the first half. So it's going to be tough playing in Highmark. It's going to be tough playing in that cold. But this is kind of the moment where you have to just transcend your surroundings.
I think back to the quote from training camp where John Harbaugh said his vision for Lamar Jackson was to be the greatest quarterback of all time. And we kind of laughed at it at the time because he'd just been eliminated by Patrick Mahomes, and that was the first time he reached the AFC Championship game. And until you start winning Super Bowls, you can't even be discussed in that category. And now I look at the fact that he is on the verge of winning his third career MVP at age 28. He is a year younger than Patrick Mahomes. He is the same number of years as a starter as Patrick Mahomes. And if he wins this MVP, that'll be one more regular season MVP than Patrick Mahomes.
Right.
And it's frustrating to think back if the Ravens had beaten the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game and gone to the Super Bowl, and that's a big if, and won the Super Bowl, you'd be talking about a Super Bowl winner with 3 MVPs, and Patrick Mahomes would have, at that point, 2 Super Bowl championships, not 3. That game shifted a lot. It changed a lot of our perception of where these guys are. But if the results of that game had gone differently, a lot of things would be different. And that's why this is such a critical stretch for Lamar Jackson, because if he can finally break through, then we'll finally have the playoff success to talk about with the regular season success for Lamar. All right. Let's turn our attention to the game on Sunday, Jonas. And it's time for our Who's Got It Better Than award, which is the award that is given to the person that's just having the best time right now. And that's got to be Roger Goodell, because the ratings for this thing are going to be berserk. You said 15 million tuned in for 50 million tuned in for the game between the Chiefs and Bills last year. I think that could be even more this year. You're talking about the 2 MVP favorites. It's Sunday at 6:00. It's going to be, we could have snow in Buffalo. There's every reason for the entire nation to be tuning into this game.
Yeah. Sean McManus, CBS Sports chairman, has got to be delighted about how this is shaping up. Frankly, like, I know you're saying that Roger Goodell's got to be, just diving into his money pit like Scrooge McDuck, but this is not like a super appetizing slate of divisional round games. I know, this is kind of the favorite weekend of NFL nerds, because you have 4 games that are ostensibly pretty good on paper, because it's, it might be just all division champions, but this is the only game that really has a close spread. I mean, you think about, all the other games. I mean, Chiefs Texans could be close, but we also just saw that the Chiefs handle the Texans, and the NFC matchups don't really appear that any more closely aligned in those matchups. So I think the NFL is putting a lot of hope in this one being good, and obviously that's why they gave it the best TV time slot of any of them.
What's your word of the day today, Jonas?
Sub-freezing, Paul.
Definition: being or marked by temperature below the freezing point as of water. First known usage, 1885. I certainly felt sub-freezing walking into the office today, and it is supposed to be sub-freezing in Buffalo. A lot of the players have gotten questions about that this week. They got questions about it last week, frankly, what it's like tackling Derrick Henry in sub-freezing temperatures. And players have admitted it's hard to do. It is more painful. It is something that a lot of players shy away from, and that's why the temperature conditions on Sunday will be important.
Yeah, the early weather forecasts from the National Weather Service: during the day, a high of 18 degrees. During the night, a low around 7. And that is misleading, because when I looked last night at when it was 20 degrees, the wind chill was 11 degrees. So if it is a low around 7 and we get to that at around 9 o'clock last night, then maybe the real feel will be somewhere closer to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which will be awesome. Just awesome.
Just awesome. For us, that'll be in the cozy press box.
I'll be wearing
awesome.
I'll be wearing a couple pairs of socks. Derrick Henry, 250 pounds, stronger, faster, bigger than so many guys on this.
Than anyone ever created.
Yeah. I cannot imagine what it would be like to be in the A gap, just waiting to have him run you over. I mean, getting hit in the face with a snowball sucks. I can't imagine what it's like to be hit by Derrick Henry in this cold weather.
It's like being hit with an ice ball. Do you ever accidentally get an ice ball when you're young and some kid, grabs larger portion of ice than snow?
Yeah.
It hurts. All right. Well, this game is being played at 6:30 on Sunday. The Ravens are favored by 1.5 points, which you put this interesting note in here, Jonas, about the fact that the Bills are their playoff history of being favored.
Yeah, if the Ravens close as a favorite, which I think they will, Buffalo opened up as a slight favorite, but it's as of last night, Ravens were favored by 1.5 points. If the Ravens close as a favorite, it would mark the first time in Buffalo Bills franchise history, and they've been around since 1970, that the Bills would be home underdogs in the postseason.
That's crazy. All right. What happened the last time these two teams played? Well, the Ravens absolutely bludgeoned the Buffalo Bills 35-10 at home. Ravens were the only team to beat the Bills by more than 3 points this season. Think about the run that the Bills went on after that. And a lot has changed since then, but boy, was that a fun game. That was the second game of the Ravens 5-game win streak. They started the season 0-2, and then they went on that 5-game win streak. Derrick Henry, of course, kicked things off with that 87-yard run, finished with 199 rushing yards. They held Josh Allen to 16 of 29 for 180 yards, no touchdowns, and a big-ass fumble on a trick play that really changed the momentum of that game. Ravens were up by 11 at that point, but they kind of, put the final nails in the coffin after that. And Buffalo was held to just 3.5 yards per carry on 23 attempts, while the Ravens averaged 8 yards per carry on 34 attempts. You recently wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where people can subscribe $1 for 6 months, about how the Bills defense has evolved since then, the Ravens rushing attack has evolved since then, and why this matchup could be a lot different when the Ravens try to run the ball on Sunday.
Yeah, I think the most notable thing looking back at the splits from that Week 4 game were just how effectively the Ravens were able to run the ball in whatever formation they wanted to. They lined up 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers. They ran well. They got into heavy personnel with, a fullback and Derrick Henry and 2 tight ends. They ran well. And obviously, I think with no Zay Flowers, you want to be a little bit more heavy personnel inclined. And I think that is going to be the decisive chess match in this game. You want the Bills to have reason to take Taron Johnson off the field. He is typically, just a demon out there as a run defender. He's their nickel back, so he's responsible for a lot of run fits. Buffalo usually is comfortable playing nickel personnel, but if the Ravens get so bold as to, trot out a 6th offensive lineman, which they did to great effect Saturday against Pittsburgh, then are you really, really comfortable playing with, 5 defensive backs against 6 offensive linemen, a fullback in Patrick Ricard, who's 300 pounds, a tight end in Charlie Kohler, who's 260, 250 pounds. That is, to me, asking way, way too much of your guys. And, Matt Milano has come back and is finally starting to turn the corner for the Bills after, some rough stretch. Terrell Bernard has been a little bit more erratic than he was last year when he led that team in tackles. But I just think personally it's asking a lot of this Bills defense to expect to hold up nickel or dime personnel, especially if the Ravens just lean into those big, heavy sets.
And Ravens fans may remember Taron Johnson's name because he was the guy that picked off Lamar Jackson in the playoff game 4 years ago and took it back to the house, which Lamar Jackson was asked about that last game.
He wasn't even asked about it. He just brought it up.
He was asked about the last game, I guess, the last time that these two teams met, and he said he saw that pick come across his screen recently, and he said that's all he'll say about that. So certainly some motivation for Lamar Jackson in this game. That was a different game for a lot of reasons too. You mentioned the health of a lot of the players on that Bills defense. I mean, the Ravens defense looked a lot different back then too. That was when Marcus Williams was starting for the Ravens. He played 92% of the defensive snaps. Eddie Jackson played 34% of the defensive snaps. He's not on the team anymore. Trenton Simpson played 63% of the defensive snaps. Remember, Josh Allen was also playing with an injured left hand in that game, so he was a little bit hobbled. And then shortly after that game, that's when the Bills traded for Amari Cooper, because that was the one kind of glaring weakness on that team, was they don't have a number one wide receiver. He really hasn't done a whole lot since they traded for him. He so far had 297 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns in 8 games, and he caught just 2 passes for 8 yards in their win over Denver last week. So their offense hasn't changed dramatically because of the emergence of Amari Cooper.
Yeah, and I think he represents what is probably the biggest argument for Josh Allen as the MVP, which is just like these receivers do not get open as much as the Ravens do. You know, when we were talking about Brandon Stevens and just what kind of challenge awaits him, the best Bills receiver in terms of getting open, as measured by ESPN's receiver tracking metrics, is Matt Collins, and he's 45th in the NFL among receivers. Keon Coleman, your boy, 84th. Amari Cooper, 91st. Curtis Samuel, who had that big catch and run touchdown against the Broncos. That wasn't so much him getting open by any route running savvy. It was just kind of a bust in coverage. Again, Bills using motion to free him from Pat Surtain. Curtis Samuel, 95th. Doesn't really matter because Van Jefferson, 61st in open score before that Ravens game against the Steelers. He still ran by Stevens for a touchdown. But when you think about this Buffalo receiving court and what it has to do, it's going to have to win contested catches. It's going to have to win after the catch. Khalil Shakir is one of the best receivers in the NFL in yards after the catch. And they just have to not mess up the way that they did. I mean, there were opportunities that they had in week 4. I think Dalton Kincaid can't grab a kind of a key pass on third down, maybe drops it or it's a little bit off and he can't grab it in. And those were, in hindsight, huge pivot points in that game.
Yeah, and you still can't discount, though, on the other side, Josh Allen just being able to do Josh Allen things. I mean, that game was in week 4 was by no means a high watermark for him, but he did also have, remember that crazy play where he's scrambling over to his right and he's one step from being out of bounds and he hurls the ball across his body over the middle of the field and completes a ball that almost goes for a touchdown.
52 yards to Khalil Shakir.
Yeah, so he can do stuff like that. And he is sometimes a little reckless with the ball, but so far this season he hasn't hit double-digit interceptions. He has been playing the safest ball of his career while also still getting the kind of crazy highlight reel plays that he has been known for.
Yeah, I think the Ravens pass rush is going to be huge in this one. The fact that they were able to get 3 sacks in week 4 was really impressive because Josh Allen is almost never sacked. He's not only playing behind a really good offensive line, but he is the best quarterback in the NFL at limiting pressures that turn into sacks. So the fact that the Ravens were able to knock the Bills off their game script, force Josh Allen into a situation where he was having to drop back on pretty much every down, I think was really, really important. But yeah, I mean, when you think about Josh Allen and what he's been able to do, I think he's got already like 2 or 3 of the highest single game passer rating metrics in the playoffs in NFL history. And you look at what he's been able to do over his career: 67% accuracy, 23 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 273 yards per game as a passer, over 50 rushing yards per game, 5 rushing touchdowns in those 10 games. He has elevated his game in the playoffs in a way that Lamar, candidly, at least largely under the Greg Roman era, definitely struggled to. And so he's going to be playing at home. He's going to have the opportunity to sleep in his own bed next to his celebrity fiance. He's living a very good, charmed life right now. Does he have as good a setup as Lamar Jackson? That could be argued. But if the Ravens, have any shot of making this a comfortable win, they're going to have to make Josh Allen look like Russell Wilson did for at least part of that game.
What's your score prediction for this game, Jonas?
I think I like the Ravens on a neutral field, but this isn't a neutral field. I worry a little bit about how good the Ravens ball carrying will be in these very, very tough situations. That's not just, Lamar being able to make passes over the middle. It's also Lamar being able to hand the ball off on read options without any problems. I don't think Buffalo will be as aggressive crashing down as Pittsburgh was, but you do kind of, when you go back and look at the film from these read options, which the Ravens have really leaned into recently, you do kind of hold your breath wondering how it was as clean an exchange as it was, because he is holding until the last second possible. And in these adverse weather conditions, I think the margin for error definitely comes down a little bit. So I'm going with the Bills 27, Ravens 24. I think the Ravens are going to have some trouble before the snap, just with how loud it is. I think they might have some trouble, bringing Josh Allen down when he goes into creative mode because of just the weather conditions. I think that is probably the biggest X factor in all this is, is Buffalo better suited to handle this game in the snow, or is it going to be Derrick Henry because he is just the biggest headache in these kind of cold weather games? It's really a toss up for me. Would it shock me if the Ravens won this game by 10, 13 points? Absolutely not. I think this Ravens defense is a lot better suited for, a normal game against Josh Allen, this Bills offense, than it was in week 4. And in week 4, they did a really, really good job at it. I just think that for me, I can't get over just how dominant Buffalo has been at home. And it's really tough for me to confidently say that the Ravens are going to come out of this with a win.
It's funny you mentioned the read option because I was watching Hard Knocks the other night and watching the super slow-mo of those read option plays and thinking, God, they really take that thing down to the wire. They go as long as possible, which is how you run an effective read option, but they would take as long as possible before you either hand the ball off or keep it. And I was thinking it is a minor miracle that they don't fumble the ball more often.
Right.
Lamar said he's not going to wear gloves. He never wears gloves. Unlike,
I hope he wears sleeves.
Yeah,
I hope he wears sleeves.
That would be interesting.
He didn't in the game against Kansas City last year, nor did he against Houston, and that was also a frigid game.
I think he did in Buffalo 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think he stopped wearing sleeves. Partly that there was that big controversy in 2019 after the game against the Steelers, where the 49ers, where their radio analyst commented on how unfair advantage was for Lamar to be wearing sleeves that kind of camouflage with his skin color, which I think stirred Lamar to not give analysts to make that kind of racist remark.
Yeah. In terms of that read option, I mean, I was thinking about it last week about them leaning into it, and it kind of reminded me of to change sports, like an NBA team during the regular season. Like they find so many different ways to score and they, get a lot of guys the ball. Then they get into the playoffs and they go, all right, Jordan Pippen, you're running a pick and roll.
Yeah.
LeBron, Dwayne Wade, you're going pick and roll. Like just give the ball to your two best players and have them run give them the most opportunities and have them run plays that that they are going to be successful on. And in a similar way, it's like having two guys that can shoot and go to the ball to the basket in a pick and roll, because you are damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you crash on Derrick Henry, Lamar's going to keep it. If you, try to stop Lamar from breaking off a big run, Derrick Henry's going to bust one on you. So it is incredibly difficult to stop. And that's why I think it's fun that they're breaking this out in the playoffs and saying it's an easy button, go to it. If nothing else is working, how are you going to stop a read option with those two?
And even the mere threat of the run game, is a weighty thing on the Bills' mind. I mean, Lamar, he was, again, like 99th percentile in so many different splits this year, but he was unsurprisingly one of the best quarterbacks in the league at play action dropbacks at a heavy personnel. Because what do defenses fear when they see Lamar and Pat Ricard and Charlie Kohler and Derrick Henry and Isaiah Likely on the field? They're like, oh shit, there's a run, and then boom, fake handoff, he's rolling out or he's dropping back and he's finding someone over the middle or on the side for an easy completion.
My score prediction for this, Jonas, is they end in a tie and they play one overtime. It's still tied, and then they just decide, all right, we're going home. That's it. It's too cold. These two teams, we don't get a satisfying conclusion. I don't know how they figure that out. I do have the Ravens coming out, Jonas, with a 26-23 win in overtime. I have the hardest time picking this game. I really don't think that this line should be 1.5. I think it should be even or a half a point, because I can't imagine a closer game. I thought the Ravens would handle the Steelers last week, and I was right. And I really don't see either team with a sizable advantage in this game. But I did predict several weeks ago that the Ravens would not lose again until at least February. And so I got to stick by that and have the Ravens either going to Kansas City or hosting the Texans in the AFC Championship game.
I think one of those games would be a lot more attractive than the other one.
For ratings, I think Ravens, I know which side of that matchup Ravens fans would like to see.
Do you?
think Texans,
Okay.
obviously. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of confident Ravens fans who would want to beat Kansas City for what happened last year.
I understand that you want to beat the best to be the best, but you just don't want to ask for trouble. That's like chanting like we want Bama when you're a mid-major team, and then you face Bama and you get absolutely destroyed. One more quick word
Don't
from
miss
our
the
sponsors before we get out of
2025 CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament in Baltimore, February 25th to March 1st at CFG Bank Arena. Watch HBCU teams battle to be crowned champion. Check out the free fan fest and performances at the Baltimore Convention Center. Enjoy downtown's top restaurants and stay in one of our amazing hotels. The CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament. You want to be here.
We've got so much more coverage coming on the BaltimoreBanner.com where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months as we look ahead to Sunday's game. Jonas, Gianna Hahn, Kyle Goon, so many more great stories yet to be told about this team. And we will have another podcast Sunday night, sometime around, 11 o'clock after that game. We'll both be in Buffalo for that game. We cannot wait to cover it. At Jonas_Shaffer is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Write us a good review. Write us a 5-star review, and I'll read it